Now then, you love a lot, welcome back to the Max Gaming YouTube channel and a brand new video where today I'm going to be giving you my predictions for the upcoming Premier League season 2021-22, where hopefully the channel is going to grow even more and we're going to be doing even more Premier League content. We're going to be doing my predictions from relegation all the way up to the Premier League champions. We're going to be using a basic tier list where it just sort of gets split into different sections. Thank you, by the way, to Hydrociraptor on Twitter for making the tier list. I'll be sure to leave it in the comments below so you can go and do it yourself and let me know who you think will finish where in the Premier League this season. Of course, before we do that, don't forget to hit the like button down below and subscribe to the channel. Turn on the notification bell so you don't miss a single video coming up in the near future. Of course, with the return of the Premier League comes the return of some Premier League reactions. Every so often I'll be diving in and giving some of my reactions to the biggest games and talking points in the Premier League upcoming. And with all that being said, let's get into it and see where I think these teams are going to finish in the Premier League this season. Okay then, as you can see, we have got ourselves a little tier list going on here. Champions, qualification for the Champions League, qualification for other UEFA competitions, mid-table mediocrity, threatened by relegation but staying up safe in mid-table, and the relegation zone. So then, let's crack into things with who I think is going to finish in 20th this season in the Premier League. And I think it's going to be Watford. I'm going to pop Watford there in the relegation zone. I think they're going to finish 20th in the Premier League this season. I do have slight worries about their new manager Isco, seeing as he only managed them for what, like 26, 27 games last season, and they just made a really late run into the playoffs and eventually into the automatic promotion zones. There's still a lot of issues defensively, I think. Defensively, they still have a lot of the same players they had in their last in the Premier League, and going forward, they really don't have Ismail Assar as a goal threat for them. They have brought in some experienced players in the form of Danny Rose, Josh King and Yari Kuchka, who obviously will offer some experience and potential in their certain positions. Josh King is capable of scoring at the Premier League level. We've seen him do it at Bournemouth, and I'm sure he'll probably hit sort of 8 or 9 goals for Watford this season in their relegation push. And of course, I mentioned earlier their main man this season is probably going to be Ismail Assar. He got himself 13 goals and 4 assists in the Championship last season. He has also proven himself in the Premier League with links to Liverpool in the past. In his last stint in the Premier League, he had 0.4 expected goals and assists per 90, which is pretty decent. Definitely puts him up there as one of the better wingers, certainly in the promoted teams and certainly in the lower half of the table. And I'm sure, should Watford get relegated this season, he'll probably end up staying up and moving on to a club like Liverpool or Manchester United or something like that. Overall, it's going to be a disappointing season for Watford. They are going to find themselves relegated at the end of the season, and I wouldn't be surprised if it's another one of them seasons where they go through 3 or 4 different managers over the course of it. So I've gone for Watford in 20th place. Okay then, let's move into 19th place. I've gone for Norwich in this position. Probably a similar season to the one they had last year, probably fly out the blocks, do pretty well, but I think that the lack of depth in their squad and the lack of creativity in certain areas will probably lead to them burning out and eventually dropping down into the relegation places. Of course, the loss of Buendia is massive, 30 goals and assists last year in the Championship, including claiming the Playmaker Award for getting the most assists with 15, and overall probably their best player, moving on to probably a comfortable mid-table team in the form of Aston Villa. They have replaced him, of course, with Milo Rashica, the Kosovan forward, joining from Werder Bremen. In Europe, he ranks in the top 2% for dribbles per 90 and is also a decent defensive forward, offering around 3 defensive duels per game completed. However, their main issue in the Championship last season was being defensively suspect, being 13th in the league for shots conceded and 7th for shots on target conceded, and I still think this is probably going to be quite a big issue for them. Tim Krul's probably going to have quite a busy season between the sticks for the Canaries, so overall I've gone for them as 19th in the Premier League this season. And thus, rounding out the relegation zone, we have gone for Newcastle United. I think this is the season where they're going to get relegated. They are in desperate need of a squad overhaul, just completely lacking of any quality other than some Maximan and Callum Wilson, who they are so overly reliant on at the moment. Of course, they've not really added any first team quality players to the squad, and they've lost 3 or 4 players who, yeah, maybe not going to get first team minutes on a regular basis, but at least offer options off the bench or from deeper positions in the squad. They were 16th in the league last season for goals conceded and expected goals conceded, and they were also 12th in the league for goals scored and chances created, and 50% of the 46 goals that they scored last season were involved in some way from Callum Wilson and Alan St-Maximin, both of whom have had pretty patchy injury records over the course of their Newcastle career. So of course, a big issue potentially should they get injured in terms of their creativity. Overall, I think this is probably going to be their last season in the Premier League before a relegation, and then I feel sorry for Newcastle fans. Hopefully Ashley sells the club, or at least brings in some form of change, maybe a director of football or sporting director, at least an upgrade in management and an upgrade in playing talent. It doesn't seem like that hard of a thing to do, does it? In 17th, I've gone for Burnley. I think this is going to be their toughest season for quite a while, certainly the one in which they look most likely to be relegated over the last, 5, 6, 7 seasons since they came back up to the Premier League. Here they are, so we're going to pop them in relegation threatened. Despite new ownership in the club, there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of investment going into the first team. Nathan Collins arrived from Stoke for around £12 million, and as a centre-back, I'm sure he'll offer some good competition in that position for Tarkowski and for Ben Mee, and Wayne Hennessy arriving on a free from Palace to offer depth in the goalkeeping position following the departure of Bailey Peacock-Farrell. However, last season, they weren't as Burnley as they actually normally are. They weren't that good defensively. 15th in the league for goals against last season, despite this very good defensive reputation they've garnered over the last sort of 3 or 4 years. And of course, the team is another year older. Chris Wood and Ashley Barnes are pushing up 30 or 30 plus, and probably won't be able to score at the same rate as they have in previous seasons. Of course, Dwight McNeil is still at the club. I feel if his departure ever happens over the course of the next couple of weeks before the end of the transfer window, Burnley are in genuine threat of being relegated if that happens. I do think, though, his quality will probably keep them up in the long term and see them just avoid the drop, possibly by a matter of a few points. Okay, then I'm going to start sort of breezing through these teams a little bit, because we're getting to the point of mid-table where teams and players are a little bit more safe from relegation. Next up in 16th, we do have Brentford. I do have them finishing pretty decent in their first campaign in the Premier League. Of course, scored the most goals in the Championship last season with Ivan Toney, scoring 31 in the process, breaking the Championship record for a single goal scoring season, taking around 3.5 shots per 90, and also creating quite a lot of chances as well, getting himself 10 assists in the Championship as well last season. I also like the signing of Christoph Ayer from Celtic. His ability to bring the ball into the midfield will be quite important for the way in which Brentford like to play. They like to bring the ball out from the back. They like to attack in that way. And I think having another ball playing centre back in their sort of squad probably will help them quite well in trying to cement their style of play onto teams in this division. 15th, we've got Southampton. I think this could be a pretty dangerous season for Southampton. They're selling a lot of their talent. Mario Lemina has departed the club, or is certainly looking like he's going to depart the club. Of course, Danny Ings leaving to join Aston Villa as a replacement potentially for the goal output of Jack Grealish, and Yannick Vestergaard seems to be on his way out to Leicester as well. And whilst they're replacing them with some decent players, Ambrosia from Chelsea on loan seems like a good prospect as a player, could get them a few goals, and Adam Armstrong, of course, a very capable Championship goal scorer. I do think this could be a difficult season for Southampton, and even potentially a season in which they face relegation, should they not invest some of this money they're receiving from some of their sales. Of course, it has been reported recently in the last sort of year or so that the club is looking to be sold on by its current owners, and that they're not really looking to invest too much into it so they get the most return on investment upon sale. And I can completely understand that, but I feel as if you're going to lose value on your asset should you sell it if they get relegated to the Championship. So it's important to balance out investment in the squad, but also getting your return on investment should they choose to sell the club. 14th, I've gone for Crystal Palace. A very interesting season ahead for Crystal Palace, possibly the most interesting one in recent memory for them. Of course, the departure of Roy Hodgson after 2 or 3 really decent seasons where they were very solid in the table and never really threatened by relegation, and replaced, of course, by former Nice and New York FC manager, I believe, Patrick Vieira, of course, Arsenal legend as well. Mark Gahey arrived from Chelsea following a really solid season at Swansea, which he reached the playoffs. Mikel Elise has joined from Reading, again after a really impressive season in the Championship, in which I believe he was Young Player of the Season in the Championship. Correct me if I'm wrong. I'm pretty sure he was. Of course, Conor Gallagher coming off the back of a decent season, all things considered, at West Brom. Even though they were relegated, he was probably one of the bright sparks in that team. And of course, Joachim Andersen, very much the same as Conor Gallagher, probably being the standout player in a relegation-threatened team in Fulham last season. They probably do need a little bit more business to be done to really bulk this squad out, and I don't necessarily have a lot of confidence in the managerial abilities of Patrick Vieira. He has shown himself to be a pretty flexible coach, but I don't necessarily think he's what Palace need. I think they need someone with some different ideas in there to really work with these young players. I could be proved wrong though, and I'll be happily proved wrong if they have a good season this year. 13th is Wolves. Don't really want to talk about them too much because there's not really a whole lot to say about them. So we're just going to pop them in there. There we go. A decent season, I suppose, upcoming for Wolves. They were decently defensive last season, 12th for goals against in the Premier League last season, but really struggled in creating chances, being 16th for expected goals, and I believe 16th for goals scored as well in the league. Of course, Raul Jimenez's injury, his skull fracture, was the biggest instigator of this downturn in form over the last year, and of course, wishing him a really good recovery, and it's good to see him back out on the pitch in the last few weeks over pre-season. And of course, the injury to Pedro Neto that ended his season quite prematurely after a really bright start to the season, which he was, for my money, probably the best young player in the league for a very good, solid period of the league. Of course, Francisco Trincao has joined the club from Barcelona, I believe, on a loan that could then lead to a permanent transfer. He could be a really fun prospect. He's a good dribbler and a good ball progressor who's actually got some decent end product. He can take a shot and he's got, a decent eye for goal. So I think he could potentially add something on the right or the left as a front three of Jimenez, Traore, and either Neto or Trincao. Could definitely get some goals. I feel like that's good enough to keep them in mid-table this season. And of course, defensively, they'll be pretty solid as always. I don't know too much about their new manager. I believe Bruno Lage is his name. Don't know too much about him, but it'll be interesting to see how he develops Wolves and takes them to the next stage of their development as a squad. Okay, then we're going to move into mid-table mediocrity, and we're going to be kicking things off in that division with Brighton and Hove Albion finishing 12th in the Premier League this season. I think they're unlikely to be as unlucky in front of goal as they were last season, of course, very famously underperforming their expected goals by quite a lot. I will caveat that though, don't expect them to create as many chances if they do start actually finding the back of the net. Of course, a product of not finishing your chances is desperation and eventually just over creating chances, which is why the deficit was so much by the end of the season. So maybe don't expect them to be as creative this season, but still expect them to be pretty decent going forward. Of course, the departure of Ben White is probably though the biggest loss in that squad at the moment. He was of course a very solid defender, of course, and joining Arsenal as a very good defender, but the very good part of his game is his ball progression, being in the top 5 in the squad for progressive carries, progressive passes and passes into the final third. He's definitely somebody who looks to get the ball upfield, and of course his fluidity in playing both a back 3 and a back 4 is probably going to be missed by Brighton this season, but I feel like Lewis Dunk, Adam Webster on the left, and probably your Veltman to make that back 3 will probably still be good enough to keep them somewhat comfortable in mid-table, I would imagine. 11th, I've gone for Everton. The Toffees had a really solid season last year, if I can just swap them two over. A really solid season last year in their only full season, I believe, under Carlo Ancelotti. Dominic Calvert-Lewin turned into probably one of the better strikers in the league. Alan looked like a really solid defensive midfielder, and in his limited minutes, James Rodriguez was probably the best creator outside of the top 8. Of course, I would still say that Rafa is probably a little bit of a downgrade on Carlo Ancelotti, and I think they could have maybe done a little bit better in their recruitment. I feel like Marco Rose was clearly looking to leave Mönchengladbach, and I feel like a Premier League job he probably would have taken, even with the Dortmund job on the table. I don't have anything wrong with Rafa though. He'll construct a very solid defence and a good spine to the team, and I feel like there's enough creative quality in that team to be able to get the goals necessary to stay in that mid-table region this season. In 10th, I've gone for Leeds. I think this is a really solid guess that they'll probably finish somewhere in upper mid-table. A very solid team. They scored a lot of goals last season, but the biggest thing that impressed me last season was actually how good their goalkeeper Ian Meslier was. Of course, it was actually quite an underrated campaign from Meslier in the end, but he actually had the best post-shot expected goals in the Premier League last season. Now we may be saying, Max, what is post-shot expected goals? What are you launching upon me? Basically, this is the difference between the actual goals conceded and the expected goals conceded. And what I'm suggesting here is that the expected goals, and what I'm saying here basically, is that the expected goals Leeds should have conceded was significantly higher than what they actually conceded, 7.7 to be specific, which is the highest difference between these two in the league, suggesting that he had probably one of the better goalkeeping seasons in the Premier League last season. The key, of course, will be to avoid burnout, which they did pretty well last season at avoiding. They were very good at maintaining the press throughout the entire season, having the best passes per defensive action metric in the Premier League, with just 7 being allowed per defensive action, better than Liverpool and better than Man City, which is incredible considering how high octane their press can be when it gets instigated. Ninth, I've gone for Aston Villa. We're going to pop them into the mid-table region. Of course, the biggest loss and talking point for them is the departure of Jack Grealish, who was actually top in the league for goal-creating actions, progressive carries into the penalty box, and fouls won. Of course, everybody talks about his creative side of this game, but the ability to get the ball and the team clawed upfield consistently was probably the biggest facet of his game and why Villa was so good last season for long swathes. I would suggest they've probably invested the money quite well as well. Buendia, of course, coming off the back of 30 goals and assists in the Championship last season. Danny Ings has scored 30 or 40 goals over the course of the last sort of 2 or 3 seasons at Southampton, and Leon Bailey is a very interesting prospect. He's a goal threat with around 2.8 shots per 90, who does a little bit of creating with 4 shot creating actions per 90, and is a really effective dribbler with 3.4 per 90, ranking him, I believe, in the top 5% in Europe. Correct me if I'm wrong, believe he's in the top 5% though. They could do with a little bit of bite at midfield with a couple of weeks left in the transfer window. Someone who's going to sort of up their defensive jewels in the midfield and who's going to probably single-handedly hold that together. I would actually argue that Idrissa Gueye coming back to the club following his stint at PSG wouldn't be an awful piece of business, even on a loan deal to get some money off the wages. Obviously, of course, with Messi joining PSG, I feel like he would offer the bite in the midfield that he offered them when he was playing for them in the Premier League, and would be a short-term option to maybe just hold them over until someone more, younger and athletic comes onto the market in the next couple of years. In 8th, I've gone for West Ham United, the final mid-table team coming off the back of an exceptional season last year under David Moyes. They have had quite a quiet summer, but I'm really impressed with the loan signing of Alphonse Areola. He was 3rd in the league for post-shot expected goals. That was the stat I was mentioning earlier, the difference between expected goals conceded and the actual goals conceded. He was 3rd in this metric despite relegation for Fulham last season. They could probably do with another centre-back, especially with the links with Issa Diop leaving the club, potentially joining Leicester, and I think the player who they're currently linked to the most, who would fit them the best, would be Nikola Milenkovic. He's a good player from set pieces, decent but if unspectacular on the ball, but good enough for a David Moyes team, and of course a really good and dominant aerial player, which is essential to playing in a David Moyes system. I would also not be against them going back in for Jesse Lingard, who was really good for them last season. I do think he benefited from not having played football for about a year, hence why he scored so many goals and was so influential in that team, but I still think he could be an able contributor in that team and probably suits the counter-attacking system of David Moyes to a T should he join. In 7th, I've gone for Arsenal. I still don't think there's a lot to be massively positive about with Arsenal at the moment, although they have made a really good signing in Ben White. 50 million does seem a little bit of an overpay for someone with only 30 appearances in his entire Premier League career and about 30 in the Championship for Leeds. And really, they're not linked with a huge amount more players. Aaron Ramsdale potentially coming in as competition for Bert Leno. Don't like that signing. Wasn't really impressed with him last season at Sheffield United, and really the rumours between them and Martin Ødegaard seem to have gone a bit quiet as well, and that's really the position they need to strengthen in. And number 10 is really essentially what they need, someone who's going to be able to link both the defence and the attack. Clearly Arteta wants to play a 4-2-3-1, 4-3-3 sort of system, and I feel like with Sambi Lokongo and Thomas Partey playing in the double pivot, they need someone a little bit more creative who's going to pull the team up the pitch on the transition when they have the ball. 6, I've gone for Spurs. I do think this is going to be another difficult season for them. Of course, they've been linked with some good players and made some really good signings. Brian Hill, really promising player from Sevilla, following a really good season. I think he was on loan last season, like Ibar or something. Had a really good season though, nonetheless. Of course, Cristiano Romero as well, who completed the most interceptions in the Champions League last season. The departure though potentially of Harry Kane could be a bit of a sticking point. He still seems likely to stay with the club, at least for the first couple of weeks of the season, but I wouldn't be surprised if the guy forces a move and leaves the club, and he's only going to be staying in the Premier League because he doesn't seem keen to be moving his family, his young family that being, out of the country. So the loss of that and not really being linked with too many strikers other than I think Dusan Vlahovic, they've been linked with, and apparently they had a bid accepted for Lautaro Martinez, who would be a really good replacement for him, by the way. There doesn't seem to be a lot of movement in that position to suggest that he would be leaving the club, though. In fifth, I've gone for Leicester. I do think they're going to probably just miss out on the Champions League this season yet again. I do think they'll probably try and go deep in a cup again. They obviously did pretty well in the Europa League, getting knocked out by Slavia Prague, and obviously won the FA Cup and then the Community Shield this season. So I do think they will look to go deep in a competition. I think they've got the depth in the squad now to do so. Patson Daka is the ideal Jamie Vardy replacement, someone who is absolutely rapid and will look to play on the final shoulder of the defender, just like Jamie Vardy does. And Boubacar Soumaré is a really good squad option, something a bit different in the midfield that they don't normally have. Probably closer to Tielemans in style in terms of his ability to pass and bring the ball upfield through progressive passes and progressive carries. Overall, probably going to play in a sort of midfield 3, midfield 2, exchanging between himself, Tielemans and Ndidi in that position. Defensively, they probably still need a replacement for Johnny Evans. I don't think he's got too many years left in the tank, and someone long-term who can basically act as the aerial dominant defender in that back three. Quite important. Yannick Vestergaard's been linked to them, Issa Diop's been linked to them. Either one of them would do the job for me and could potentially push them towards the Champions League places. So now we are left with the top 4, the Champions League chasers, and in fourth, I've gone for Liverpool. Now, hear me out. I don't want to, poo-poo all over Liverpool. I think they've got a really good team. Of course, Ibrahim Konate is a fantastic signing who is going to add real depth into that centre-back position that obviously we know so well they just didn't have last season. However, the biggest issue I have is actually the front line. They're all another year older. Firmino doesn't really look like a Premier League winning forward at the moment. I think there was the summer they had to sell him to get any kind of return on investment on him. Sadio Mane had a really down season last year, really underperformed his goal scoring metrics, and overall was shifted more into a creative role to make up for the lack of creativity in the midfield. Of course, as well, the departure of Jorginho Wijnaldum leaves them a little bit short in midfield, though I imagine this will probably see Curtis Jones get a little bit more minutes in that position and maybe even moving Trent into the centre mid position. Overall, I just don't think there's the depth in the squad to come out the other end with a Premier League title. I could again be proven wrong, and I would be very happy to be proven wrong. However, I think the investment in the squad is needed, and I think they themselves have admitted that following 2 years of success, this is going to be a bit more of a rebuild year, reconstruction year. Third, we've gone for Manchester United. This is not a slight on them. I don't think they're going to be any worse than last year. I just think that the top 2 are just going to take another step forward. I really like the signing of Jadon Sancho. I did a video a little while ago where I think I talked about him being like top for penalty box entries and progressive carries, progressive balls, movement into the final third. He was top in so many progressive metrics and creative metrics in the Bundesliga last season. He offers them an actual out-and-out right winger, which they just haven't had in the last few years, and you can see that I think it's like 40% of their goals came from the left-hand space last season. They really hammed it down the left-hand side, and having someone who can go right and actually offer creativity from that position and goal scoring as well is going to be so important for them looking to push towards potentially the Premier League this season, but I think more importantly, depth in other competitions, a good run in the Champions League and a good run in the Cups. So who's it going to be then? Who is going to finish second and who is going to finish first? In second, I've gone for Manchester City. For now, this could change. It very well probably will change. If they do not sign a striker this window, they will not win the Premier League this season. It is as simple as that. I do not think that Gabriel Jesus is a Premier League winning striker. Harry Kane is a Premier League winning striker, at least he hasn't done it, but he's got the quality to do so, is what I'm trying to say. They will have all the creativity they need with Jack Grealish, Kevin De Bruyne, Raheem Sterling, Mahrez, Bernardo Silva, loads of players who can create within that position. They're so solid defensively with Ruben Diaz in that defence and have a really good goalkeeper. They just lack a focal point. They lack a goal scorer. And of course, Pep has always said if he could play a team of midfielders, he happily would do. And you can see he probably wants to do that. But a focal point, a number 9 who is going to score you 20 plus goals a season is so important, especially now they don't have Sergio Aguero to lean on when he's fit and actually able to play. That of course means that there is one team left, one team who is going to win the Premier League this season, and it is Chelsea. I cannot believe I'm saying that after how poor they started off last season. Chelsea, in my opinion, are going to win the Premier League not by a canter. It's going to be probably the tightest title race in a very long time. The reason I've gone for this and what actually tipped Chelsea over the mark for me, I initially had City for the longest time, was the signing of Romelu Lukaku. He is going to bag you 20 goals a season with ease. He did it at United in one of the worst United sides I have ever watched under Jose Mourinho in his first season. Okay, it didn't really work under Ole, but he doesn't really suit the system. But he's just gone out to Italy, won a Serie A, bagged goals galore for fun, and I think this Chelsea team is absolutely geared up for him to bag 20-25 goals in the Premier League this season. Creativity of Havertz and Ziyech around him, Hudson-Odoi coming back into form, Timo Werner able to create and goal score, probably a little bit better than last season despite his extreme underperformance of his expected goals. A solid midfield with Jorginho coming off the back of possibly being one of the best midfielders in the world last season, and N'Golo Kante looking back to his best. Solid wing backs in James and Chilwell, and a back three that could have Jules Koundé coming in from Sevilla. Overall, probably the most well-rounded squad in the Premier League at the moment. Goalkeeper is the only issue I would maybe have. Edouard Mendy didn't massively impressed me last season, and obviously Kepa is so inconsistent you can't really trust him to deliver your Premier League title. But I do think that they have that number 9 that Man City are simply lacking that will propel them to the Premier League title this season. And thus concludes my Premier League predictions for this season. What did you think? Let me know, of course, in the comments down below. And of course, I will leave a link to this in the description so you can go do it yourself and let me know where you think each team is going to finish in the Premier League this season. I'm not 100% certain on some of these decisions. I think the relegation zone is so open because there's so many teams who could get relegated. I feel like anybody in those bottom 2 tiers could get relegated this season. Obviously, the title race is going to be really tight. If City go out and sign Kane or a equivalent striker, yeah, they probably will win the league because they've got a better squad than Chelsea, but that lack of a number 9 for me is probably what's going to keep them from winning it. But again, like I said, comments down below, let me know what you think. Do your own tier list, and of course share with me on social media. My Twitter and Instagram is MaxDJ Goodwin for both. With all that being said, thanks very much for watching. Stay tuned for some quality Premier League content coming to you over the course of the 2021-22 season. With all that being said, thanks very much for watching. Have a lovely weekend. I will catch you later.